Hello, everybody. Welcome week 7. This week we start shifting our focus from the neurobiology and all the other concepts that we've been studying, and we are turning them into how to treat persons who are suffering with trauma or from trauma. So this week I want to share with you a story about a client named Beth. Beth came to me referred by her employer because she was having panic attacks at work, which was interfering with her capacity to perform her work duties. She is an ABA therapist, so she's very familiar with mental health and behavioral issues, for a lack of better terms. So in our first appointment, Beth was very smiley. She was very engaged. She was very happy to be there. She felt a lot of relief just from having made the decision to engage in treatment. So our conversation in the first session was very casual. It was very kind of conversational in that we discussed what brought her to me and some of the things that she would like to work on, but it didn't go very deep. It stayed mostly surface and presenting issues. As our treatment continued in the weeks 2, maybe through 5, Beth started to open up a little more. And she was working slowly, but she was working in treatment because she initially wanted to work on reducing anxiety and eliminating panic attacks. That was a lot of the information she was presenting to me. But as we worked together, it became more apparent to me that there were underlying issues that perhaps were kind of brewing beneath, which were creating or triggering or contributing to the anxiety and ultimate panic attacks. So fast forward a couple of weeks, Beth comes in and she's feeling very defeated. She's kind of bent in half and she's not maintaining eye contact. And she just blurts out. So I want to tell you, my mom was awful. She emotionally neglected me. She was never very compassionate. She was never kind. She was very unpredictable. And so I can't even talk to her at this point. So it's just important that you know, and she was, again, very fast. It's just important that you know that my mom was awful. Okay, well, we talked about that for a little bit. What impact did she think that had on her? And then she's like, oh, yeah, and by the way, I was sexually abused by my babysitter from, age 12 to age 15. And then she said, but I don't want to talk about it. That was fine. I mean, she had huge disclosure. And really at that point, what I was trying to do, or what my goal was to help her to feel safe and centered and to kind of regroup so that she could re-engage with her life after our appointment, because she had, created significant vulnerability for herself. So we pulled her back together and she was great for the next week. And when she came in the following week, we started to talk about it a little more. So when you step back for a second and look at this case, it took 6 weeks for Beth to disclose any kind of trauma or any kind of difficulty in her upbringing. And so the emotional neglect, just on its own, would be considered like a chronic prolonged stress, which, chronic prolonged stress disorder. She could have, by failed attachments and by continued emotional neglect, have these symptoms because of this chronic stress. The sexual abuse, that alone could be considered a type 1 trauma. But the combination of the two made it very important that we had solid safety in place, that she felt comfortable, confident, and secure in our working relationship, because she was now going to lead the process for us. She was going to determine when she felt safe. She was going to determine when she was going to disclose and how deep she would go. So it's really important in trauma. That is like the tenet, the core, that the client has to feel safe. And it might seem obvious, but with this particular vulnerable population, it is very important that they have sense of ownership and safety in the therapeutic relationship. So as Beth and I moved on, she really started to develop a healthy attachment to not just the time we had together, but to our relationship. She had such significant failure in her attachment when she was younger that she had never learned to emotionally trust, to emotionally bond, to be able to manage her affect. It was very labile, and she didn't really feel consciously and unconsciously that the world was a safe place, that she could connect pleasurable feelings with interactions with others. So her field attachment was pretty significant. So our therapeutic relationship helped her to develop a healthier sense of attachment without transferring the negative feelings of her trauma onto me. So she had also successfully brought up her defense mechanism, which has always been to withdraw. Again, she doesn't attach with people, she just withdraws. And when she gets more anxious or when she starts to feel unsettled or dysregulated, she withdraws. And this is what was happening at work too. She wasn't able to withdraw, so the anxiety would percolate until it became a true panic attack. So in working with her defense mechanism so that we didn't leave her, void of any way to regulate or to manage her anxiety so that her psyche didn't become overwhelmed, we had to create kind of an opposite, equal and opposite, which they discuss this in your readings. We don't strip people of their defense mechanisms. What we do is we help them to maintain their means of coping while adding in kind of the equal and opposite. So Beth was able to begin engaging first with me and then with some peers. She joined a yoga class, a small private studio, so she did not feel intimidated. She found that very empowering, so it served a lot of purpose, mental, physical, and emotional. She brought her husband into the treatment so that he could then serve as a more knowledgeable support worker. Now he knows where he has most of the idea of what it is that she is struggling with, and she can speak open and honestly. So we had her engaging, but also giving her permission to withdraw. When she would withdraw, we came up with a contract that she could withdraw, meaning turn into herself or to avoid an activity for 10 minutes. Then she needed to approach one of her supports and just explain that I was feeling overwhelmed and give word to her emotion, give identity to her feelings so that she wasn't just continuing to contain them. She would text me, she would call me. She found it very safe just knowing that she had that option. And oftentimes she didn't need a call back. She just needed to know, that she had an option when she was feeling overwhelmed. So, that leads me to talk about her resources. Beth's resources initially were very limited, but they did evolve through treatment. Her social resources became her yoga community and her spouse and a couple of friends from college she re-engaged with. Her spiritual resource was interesting because she didn't have any belief in a higher power. So through the incorporation of meditation and yoga, she started to develop this sense that there was something greater in the universe than her. And that's how she then described her higher power or her spiritual being. And for her, she called it nature. She always felt very calm, very soothed, very relaxed in nature. And that helped her, when she would lay down in a field, look up and realize that there was something bigger than her in this universe. And so that's what she identified as her spiritual base. So also with her supports, we talked about her physical supports, obviously the yoga, but she also, had some projects that she would do in her house, which were physical, which helped to, one, keep her focused, two, to give her something to do instead of withdrawing. So she had some physical projects that she would do. And then her psychological, that was her defense mechanisms. That was when we created a resource with her defense mechanism instead of just having it be continuously withdrawing and then not coming back or having something positive on the other side. So I hope that makes sense. I think what I would like to do is to talk about kind of how her treatment evolved. So first, obviously, we did the slow development of trust. She set the pace and she set the structure, what she would disclose. Beth was not a trauma client who needed to process the details of her trauma. She needed to process the impact of her trauma. So it would not have been appropriate for me to push her to describe all of the things that she had experienced. Rather, I stayed with her on her journey while also challenging her, but not taking her to a place where she did not need to go. So our safe space really allowed Beth to challenge ideas without rejection. She started to build a stronger sense of self because she didn't have as much shame and doubt, because she could challenge me. We could challenge ideas together. We could challenge feelings and experiences. And so it began to help her feel stronger and have a greater sense of what her ideas and values were. And she took ownership. And that, again, all was because it was a safe place. She was not shamed. She was not told she was wrong. She was not embarrassed. She felt very safe and encouraged. Again, that was also through the attachment, because she was learning to attach positive feelings to our relationship and the experiences she was having, and she could take that and spread it out into her greater life. So with her stronger sense of self, she started to discuss the impact that the trauma had on her life. She discussed early on how she became very insecure, self-conscious, and withdrew from others. When she would withdraw, she would feel safe. So now you can see the evolution of her defense mechanism. Initially, it was a very powerful way for her to escape and to avoid the intensity that was brewing, and it continued into adulthood until it became maladaptive. It got to the point where she was detached both emotionally and physically from her marriage, from her clients, from her workplace. So when we started adding the opposite, which was to balance out the withdrawal from others, she started to re-engage with her world. So fast forward to just 2 weeks ago, Beth recently came into my office after having a conversation of, my mom is awful and I can't tell her anything, and feeling okay and empowered with who she was, and, accepting and grieving the loss of the relationship that she never had. And she came in and she said, well, I told my mom everything. So she had gotten in her car after our appointment, and she called her mom, who lives in another state, and she told her everything, all about her abuse and everything traumatic that had happened to her in that 3 or 4 year span of time. And her mom actually handled it very well, and she responded with a lot of support and care. So that was a great experience. She then went home and she talked more with her husband. So she's starting to, instead of withdraw, she's starting to share, but with people who, specifically her husband and myself, who are safe. And then her husband came in, and he was great. He felt included, and he felt now more understanding instead of rejected or hurt by her behaviors. And so just this past session I had with her, she came in and decided that she wanted to take her control back. And so together we created a letter to her abuser. Now, she may never mail it, but putting things in writing, and it started with, I won't protect you anymore, and you can no longer have power over me. So now she's starting to grow stronger. She is taking the events that she has processed, and she is building strength from them. So Beth is a fascinating client who is complicated in her trauma, in that she has long sustained trauma, and she also has specific events. But she wasn't one who needed to re-experience any of the details. She needed to build forward. And she was able to take her resources and develop an attachment and a trusting relationship to grow, put her trauma in a piece of her life, not define herself by it, and helped herself to develop greater coping mechanisms, greater, balanced defense mechanisms. So I hope that that's helpful, and I hope that it makes sense. Let me know if you guys have any questions. You're doing great. I appreciate all the feedback you give me. Week 8, we have no assignments, self-care week. Please do something fun and enjoy. So you guys, thanks so much, and I will talk to you soon.